Hello, you're very welcome to our broadcast on pregnancy and arthritis. My name is Gráinne O'Leary and I'm Chief Executive in Arthritis Ireland. I'm delighted to be joined by Donna Walsh, who lives with arthritis and is mother to three beautiful children, Ruby, Hugo and Louis. Thank you so much for joining us, Donna.
No problem at
and
all.
for sharing your experience and your story with us today. So delighted you could be here.
Great to be here.
So I might start by asking, what's it like being mum to three young kids? You must have your hands full all the time.
Yeah, it's busy. They're still so young. Ruby is 4, Hugo is 2, nearly 3, and Louis is 4 months. So they all are, quite needy in their own ways, but they're great fun and they're very funny and they're. They keep me on my toes, but
sure they do.
Yeah, it's all good. It's all good. They're happy and healthy, and that's the main thing.
Okay. So tell us a bit. Just tell us a bit about Ruby, Hugo, and Louis in terms of are they in school? How do they all get on?
Yeah, they get on great. Like as I said, they're so young. They're kind of a bit oblivious to everything. Ruby started school this year. Obviously, with the COVID and everything, it was a bit of a mad year and we were all at home a lot and kind of on top of each other. So Ruby started school in September and Hugo starting Montessori in January. And I think it's good for them for the bit of routine and stuff like that. But their new brother came and they took to him really, really well. In fairness, I think they have each other, so they kind of gang up on the little baby a little bit and they're kind of like, we're to the two buddies and who's this new guy. But they're really good and they, play with him on the ground. And they're
getting
great.
used to him.
Yeah, they're getting used to him. They kind of forget about him sometimes, but yeah, they haven't done any damage to him yet or anything like that.
Good to hear. So, I'm conscious that in addition to being a mum, part of your story is that you're also living with arthritis. Yeah. Is that something that your children are aware of? And do they understand when you're maybe
They definitely don't know that I have some form of arthritis or anything like that, but they do know that mommy gets a sore back or has a sore knee, and they can physically see if my knee is swollen or stuff like that. And sometimes things like, if I'm giving them a bath, then it would be kind of hard to kneel or to pick the baby up from the ground, and I have to say oh, mommy's sore back or, whatever. And I just kind of roll it into a sore back or a sore knee or whatever like that. And they just know that. But they're actually quite, kind of caring in their own way. And they know that. And if they have to do something more physical, daddy just do that.
Yeah. So let's go back a little bit now.
Yeah.
So I know that you were diagnosed with spondyloarthritis at the age of 16.
Yeah.
So you were pretty young.
Yeah.
So take us back to, when you were a teenager and, what was it like learning that you had arthritis, or what were your first symptoms?
I probably even had it longer than I knew. It's funny to think that I've actually had arthritis for longer than I didn't have it, So when I was in secondary school, probably 14, 15, my knee started swelling up and I played sports pretty badly, to be honest, but I did play and I thought it was some kind of an injury. And I had a scope on my knee and they were like, there's nothing wrong with it really, it's just very, very inflamed. And then my hands started to get very stiff. I had big lumps on the back of my hands. And eventually I was brought to a rheumatologist and he diagnosed me with, I think they called it rheumatoid arthritis then, or inflammatory arthritis. So obviously I was kind of like, oh, cool, whatever. I was 16, I didn't care. I was like, taking medicine and I'll be fine. But I think over the years that I realized that this wasn't going away and this was something I kind of had to live with. But really because I think they got it when I was quite young and they got it early. And I was one of, it was just when biologics were coming in. So I was very lucky kind of, I suppose, at the timing that I got it. And the arthritis reacted pretty well. And I was able to live pretty comfortable with it after kind of maybe a year or two of being quite swollen and in pain. But so they kind of got it under control and got it managed, I suppose, by the time I finished secondary school.
Okay. Yeah. And would you, as a teenager, being diagnosed with arthritis, did you share that news with your friends? How did your friends react?
I think I did, because I thought it was kind of pretty cool probably at the time to have some kind of condition like this. But I don't think anyone really knew what that was. And I actually remember a teacher in my secondary school, and I was on crutches, and I told her or something like, maybe I was like, oh, I have arthritis. And I remember her like rolling her eyes at me, basically like, how could you have arthritis? You're like, you know, in transition, you're like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But I don't think anyone really had any understanding of it. And even to this day, like, it's not something I'm like, you know, going around telling all my friends about or talking about kind of constantly, because it's not something you see, and people just think that I get on with it. And, you know, if I am having a bad day, I probably don't see many people on that day, only my family, you know what I mean? So it's not that I'm trying to hide it. It's just that it's kind of a funny condition in that it's not super visible, and people don't really understand what it is like. And being in pain is kind of, I think, unless you're in pain yourself, it's kind of hard to know what that feels like, you know?
So, you know, you finished school. So talk to me about that, you know, new chapter of your life.
Yeah, like
after school, you know, education, career.
Yeah, I went to college in UCD, and I, you know, went into the workforce, and my whole 20s were just a blast. I was in remission. I took my biologic on time, and I really it kept everything at bay, and I totally forgot, to be honest. In my 20s I was very lucky, and I got on with life, and yeah, I would have got a swollen knee here and there, an ache or a pain, but it was nothing that, once I kept on my medication and I, you know, kept seeing my rheumatologist, everything was kept pretty well. So I kind of, you know, it was probably, I suppose, looking back now, in remission, or, you know, heavily kind of controlled anyhow during that time. So really, it didn't play much of a part. I was very lucky to have, as I said, probably getting on the drugs at an early age and everything like that did help. And I was very well.
Okay.
And had a great time.
Great time in your 20s.
Great time. Yeah. Seems like a distant memory now.
So when you started then, you know, thinking about having a family, you know, how did your arthritis feature in your decision making, or did it feature?
Yeah, so I suppose because, you know, I was I had pretty much the same consultant over, you know, most of my 20s in Vincent's, and I was in a long-term relationship from my early 20s. So, you know, I got married when I was 30, and I always knew I wanted to have a family. So I asked the question early about, like, what about these drugs? Can I have babies on these drugs and all this? And I was told kind of from the start that, you know, obviously with pregnant women, there's a lot of unknown, but it seemed that it was perfectly safe to stay on a biologic when you're conceiving and when you were pregnant. The main thing was to be in remission and not to be in an active flare and stuff like that. So I kind of always knew that, and that was, you know, I just took that with me, I suppose, and I knew that hopefully I'd be able to conceive and have a healthy pregnancy, and that the drugs would not be hopefully a factor. So I had the conversations early, I suppose, with my consultant.
Okay. And was there any link between, I suppose when you became pregnant, then was there any link between sort of your rheumatologist and your obstetrics team, for instance?
So I moved to San Francisco when I was 30, and I left the kind of nice bubble I had in St. Vincent's and went over to a new rheumatologist in San Francisco, and there was no link, to be quite honest, over there. It was quite siloed, and but I had a great obstetrics team, and they looked after me very well. But I was in total remission on my first pregnancy. I didn't have to take any biologics at all. I didn't take any drugs at all the whole time I was pregnant, and I hadn't one pain or an ache. I was very lucky. I got pregnant very easily, and I had quite an easy pregnancy on my first, so it was fine.
So that was a really positive.
Really positive. And I was like, oh, this is fine. I can totally do this.
And was there anything you did at that time to kind of keep yourself strong and healthy?
But I think it was probably, you know, I think it was my first pregnancy. I was trying to eat well, and I was very active. Looking back now, I had so much time because it was just me and my husband, you know, and I rested and stuff like that. But because I was feeling well, and because, you know, I was effective in remission, you know, I was very lucky, and I didn't have to think too much about I really didn't know what to expect, I suppose. You know, I wasn't expecting any type of a flare or anything like that. I actually was kind of most worried about the conception and pregnancy part, really. So that ended up going fine.
Yeah, and then you had Ruby. Ruby was born, and you were delighted.
Delighted, absolutely, yeah.
But you were hit with the flare.
Yeah, I did.
So what was that like?
So I went back on my biologic pretty soon after I had her. My rheumatologist said it was fine, and next thing I noticed, some of my joints were swelling up, and normally I would just take my injection and they would go down and I'd be fine, but it wasn't working anymore. And all of a sudden, like joints that never really bothered me were starting to hurt, especially around my sacroiliac and my lower back and my hip. And I was actually kind of confused. I didn't really know what was going on.
And how long was that after you?
I would say maybe 10 to 12 weeks after I had her. And I developed like a limp because my hips were so sore and stuff like that. And I just kept taking my biologic, and I probably wasn't in as, regular communication with my rheumatologist. I was also moving back to Ireland. I was kind of in a flux, I suppose, between, insurance and all that kind of stuff. And really I was I was just patched up with the course of steroids, and it wasn't until I came back to Ireland that I realized that I was in a pretty bad flare, and I needed to get my medication changed and everything needed to be revised again. And that was the first time I really had a proper, like a flare that really impeded my day-to-day life. And it actually came as a bit of a shock, because I think I was probably a little bit naive over the years and in my 20s and having an easy pregnancy. I just thought that this is fine. Like, I'm able to do this. I can just get on with life. And next thing, I was just knocked back a bit with that particular flare. But I did come back to Ireland. I went back to my consultant in Vincent's, and he changed my medication. Pretty soon I was feeling good again.
And were there any, as well as your medications, getting that reviewed and changed, were there any other kind of practical supports that helped you at that time that you were going through the flare? I mean, in terms of, you still had Ruby, who was just a few weeks old. And, how did you manage that whole period?
I suppose, well, I can, looking back after having 3 pregnancies since then, I can definitely tell you that I've managed my most recent flare a lot better than I managed the one with Ruby on my first. As I said, I was kind of confused about the whole thing. I didn't really know what was going on. So I kind of depended a lot on just taking anti-inflammatories and wearing like knee supports and other joint supports and stuff like that. And I just kind of got on with my day-to-day. But I think when I did come back and I had more family around, I had more help, and I had, a kind of a trusted medical support, then I definitely got better then.
And in terms of when you had Ruby, what decision did you make around breastfeeding, for instance?
So I was always really wanted to breastfeed. I was, again, probably a bit naive, thought this would be fine. I just take to it really easily. Anyway, so I breastfed her, but it turned out that I had pretty low supply. I found it really hard, and it wasn't the kind of nice, romantic dream I had in my head about breastfeeding. But I continued to breastfeed her for probably the first 10 weeks of her life. Would had to supplement because of supply issues. But I found, and looking back now, it was obviously because I had started retaking my biologic. I was probably a little bit immunocompromised, and I suffered really badly with mastitis. And to the extent I actually ended up with an abscess and had to have that removed when I was in San Francisco and stuff like that. So it wasn't an easy journey on her breastfeeding, but I still tried again with Hugo. And again, I was hit with recurrent mastitis as well with him, but it was something I felt really strongly about, and probably put myself under a lot of pressure to do for the first 2, But then for my most recent, my third, I realized that it had taken its toll on the first, on Ruby and Hugo. So I decided actually for my last baby that I had during the summer that I wasn't going to breastfeed. And again, I had the guilt and, felt that I should, but I realized I had not just one newborn, I had 2 other kids that I had to mind as well. And I knew that it was hard and that it just didn't come easy to me, and that I was just going to put my energy somewhere else. This time around.
So you kind of assessed the situation.
Yeah, exactly. And I had to take more than, I had to take everything into consideration. And whereas it was a little bit tricky and I felt really bad, like letting my milk dry up the first week, the hormones and everything, you're very emotional about everything. But looking back now, whereas I'm very pro breastfeeding, and if I was back again at my first I definitely would still do it, but it just didn't really, it was difficult for me. So I'm glad I tried 2 times, but I'm also glad I didn't try the last time. Yeah.
So tell me, you've had 2 further 2 other children. You've had Hugo and Louis.
Yep.
How were those pregnancies in comparison to your first one, and then the postpartum period as well?
So for instance, for Ruby, I didn't have to take any medication at all. For Hugo, I did have to stay on my biologic for the first probably half of the pregnancy, and then I seemed to be okay. And then for my most recent pregnancy, I stayed on the biologic the whole way through. And there was, I was in close, consideration with my obstetrician, and I was also in contact a lot with the rheumatology maternity team in Harold's Cross. So it was all very, I wasn't just going off on my own tangent. It was, very planned, I suppose, after the first one. I was kind of winging it a little bit. My second and third pregnancies were a bit more controlled. But after my second pregnancy, I had a relatively good pregnancy again, with the biologic, but pretty much soon, maybe 8 to 10 weeks again after I had Hugo, I just realized that my injections weren't working anymore and I was getting very stiff. That was probably my worst flare after him. It was worse than Ruby. He was a tricky baby. He had a lot of reflux and colic. He didn't sleep at all. And I was really stressed out, and I had a really bad flare. I think all that lack of sleep and the stress and everything definitely played into that.
And you still have another, effectively another
exactly,
baby as well.
Yeah, exactly. And she was 23 months when he arrived, and she was really small, and she was full on. And she wasn't very impressed with this new little fella who came to kind of take her thunder a little bit. You know what I mean? So, I ended up with inflammatory markers that were off the Richter scale. I was really stiff. I found it very hard to lift him. I again had a limp. It was that really hot summer in 2018, and I just couldn't leave the house most days. It was a rotten time, to be honest. And again, you feel this kind of guilt and I have these 2 babies. Why can't I look after them properly? And I ended up really being very reliant on anti-inflammatories, which ended up hurting my stomach, and it was a bit of a vicious cycle. And the rheumatology team and my consultant, they were great, but it was really just switching me from one biologic to the other and none of them working. And it was kind of scary because I was like, when am I going to get better to mind my kids? Because the flare with Ruby had ended pretty quickly, but this flare was going on up to a year. You know what I mean? And it was pretty tough.
So what happened to kind of transform
So eventually,
that?
I suppose, one thing I suppose, I eventually got a drug that seemed to help me.
Okay.
And that was kind of the turning point. But before that, I had kind of realized that I was so heavily reliant on the medication, and I was just going to my consultant to get my prescription refilled. And I realized that I have to probably take control of this a little bit myself, you know what I mean? And I did look at kind of changing my diet, eating more healthy. Really, my diet probably in my 20s, early 30s was not very healthy. And I really looked at changing that. I did a lot more kind of research myself into the condition. And I did a lot of work with the physio, and just tried to make my actual body stronger.
To meet the challenges.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. Because even it's very difficult to get your body strong if your joints are inflamed, but it is possible, and you can definitely, inflammation will really weaken your joints, but you can still, there is things that you can do to make your body stronger. Yeah.
And how, all the while you've got 2 very small children, and then you now have a third as well.
I know,
so how do you manage all of that?
Well, yeah, I think a few people probably thought I was mad after I was having a third, because it really was miserable after Hugo. But I kind of was went into this third pregnancy and was I'm going to really be much more prepared this time for the. So again, a lot of communication with the nurses in Harold's Cross, and I definitely looked after myself better in pregnancy, and I did a lot of, I suffered a lot in my lower back and my sacroiliac, And maybe that was some kind of, issue from pregnancy, or maybe that was arthritis. It's very hard to know, but either way, I did a lot more prenatal Pilates and really worked on strengthening my back. And I also, I just ate a lot better. I tried to like remove things like, like processed foods and sugar, and like I'm a very sweet tooth and stuff like that. Coffee, things that I don't even know what is good for people, but I try and experiment to see what triggers me.
Maybe you felt better, stronger.
What I felt better with, you know what I mean? And I know things like that. And so I'm definitely feeling like I'm not 100%, but I'm feeling pretty good this time around compared to how I was on my second. And I do think it's because I've been a bit more in control and a bit of, really preempted this kind of flare, and I'm trying to manage it a little bit better. But also, I like when I have pain, like I go for things like acupuncture. I walk every day, no matter how I'm feeling. I push the buggy around, and I try and get as much rest as I can. And that's not easy, but I definitely think for me, for the swelling and the inflammation and stuff like that, the one thing I do notice that helps it is rest and sleep, and good sleep. But it's very hard to have that when you have a lot of small kids in your house.
Well, it sounds like you've, on that journey, you've learned an awful lot.
But that's it.
Yourself.
I didn't know any of this.
Just listening to you sounds. You've learned an awful lot.
Yeah.
And you're kind of you really sound like you're in control.
I feel like that, and that's what another reason. Like I think when, as I said, people said I was mad having a third baby, and I was like, I'm not going to let this arthritis dictate how many kids I have. You know what I mean? Obviously, I can't, be irresponsible and, have kids if I'm not physically able to have them. But I always wanted 3, and I was like, I can manage this better this time. And I feel like I have managed it. And I think it is a combination of constant communication with your medical team and respect for them and the drugs that they give you and what they do. But also you have to take some kind of responsibility yourself, and things like exercise, diet, being nice to yourself and giving yourself a break, and not, feeling that you should be superwoman.
Yeah, not beating yourself up.
Yeah, beating yourself up. And I am normally quite hard on myself, but I think I've just let a few things slip this time that I probably wouldn't have in the past, Yeah.
One of the interesting things about your story as well is that you got in contact with Our Lady's Hospice and Care Services, the rheumatology unit there. How did that help you, I guess, with your journey? So
I was put in contact by my consultant at the time, Professor Fitzgerald and Vincent, and he was like, this thing exists. It's a team of nurses and physios in Harold's Cross that help pregnant women in particular. And I was like, okay, cool. I didn't have any babies at this time, but I knew that I wanted to. So I actually had met them before I had been in contact with them before I went to San Francisco and had babies. And then when I came back to Ireland, they were a huge support to me, They are the link between, rather than, calling up a secretary and waiting for an answer from your consultant, they're just more readily available, and they're just a wealth of information about, getting pregnant, having a healthy pregnancy with arthritis. And, actually, like the nurse that I've been dealing with, Louise, like I had a question a couple of weeks ago about a vaccine and a live vaccine for my youngest. And she called me at like 7:00 in the evening time and was like, no, you should wait until he's 6 months, and, stuff like that. And she just knows this stuff, you know what I mean? So it's just other than your consultant, it's somebody who's, very kind of quickly available and really knows this kind of pregnancy element of it. And there's also the physio that I've worked with, and, I had a physio session with her, Mary, over Zoom, and like literally the session was me lifting Louis, and it was like, no, that's wrong. You're doing that wrong. You're going to hurt yourself. And it was like, he was my weights basically, and he's a big baby, so he's actually very heavyweight. But it was great, like, you know what I mean? Like she was like, no, you're doing that wrong. Your back is really tense. You're going to hurt yourself. And to be able to do that with someone who understands that kind of inflammation pain is really helpful.
I think you mentioned beforehand as well, just about, the fact that, we talked about flares during the postpartum period, and how I suppose you try to preempt a flare, after having a baby. Can you tell us just a little bit more about that?
well, I suppose I knew what I was getting into with the third, and I knew there was a flare coming. So again, I decided to keep taking my biologic the whole way through. And then I had appointments made. I think Louise, the nurse in Harold's Cross, would have rang me in the week after I had the baby. I would have had my bloods taken pretty soon and regularly afterwards to see how they were tracking. But I also had I knew I was going to feel, not in the immediate part, but maybe 6, 8, 10 weeks postpartum, that I was going to feel a bit miserable. So I had people to help me. I have, a childminder who, I suppose, given the COVID and everything this year, my parents live in Tipperary. I haven't seen them as much. So I do have, this great childminder who comes in and looks after the older kids when I need to, or when I'm not, feeling well. And knowing that I'm going to need extra help and that I'm not able to do it all on my own. I think that was the main thing that I kind of learned from the first two, that I was not Wonder Woman, and to ask for help and have help lined up. And that was a big learn kind of for me, and to be able to kind of hand off a little bit too. Yeah.
And you've mentioned about sort of the role of diet, exercise, being so really important part of your routine to stay strong and healthy. What are your routines and best practices? And I suppose how hard is it to establish those when you have 3 small kids?
Yeah, I'd love to. In my head, I probably think I'm better than I am. You know what I mean? But it's, I think, as I said, I feel things for me are like sugar and heavily processed food. So as a result, you have to cook a lot of your food, and you have to chop a lot of vegetables and things that take up quite a lot of time. And it's hard to find time when you have that. So, I probably would batch cook a lot. I'm very lucky. My husband is a very good cook, so he does help in that regard. But it's kind of all about organisation. So some weeks will be great. You'll have a great Sunday evening. You'll have everything organised for the week, and some weeks won't be as good. And it's again about not beating yourself up. If you fancy a scone on a Tuesday morning and you had a bad night and you're up all night, but at the same time trying to keep the diet. I do think diet, for me anyhow, it does play a big role for me. So I definitely think eating healthy helps, and it also kind of makes you feel a little bit more in control of the situation. And then whatever, hail, rain or shine, I'm out for a walk with the buggy every day. And I think it's great for my head as well, if nothing else. Just get a bit of fresh air. I live in a lovely area and go down to the sea for a walk, and I feel a million times better coming back. So I think I think a lot of it is, it's keeping a positive mental attitude. And for me, getting out and getting fresh air and getting a walk. And he sleeps better in the buggy anyhow. So
you also mentioned about rest, which we know is so important. How do you find the time and space to recover and recuperate when there's just so much going on?
So much going on. And I think there's nothing more annoying than telling a woman with a new baby to sleep when the baby sleeps, because we all know that the baby sleeps for 20 minutes or is unpredictable, and you've got a million other things to do. But I also, this time, I just prioritized it. So for instance, if my husband at the weekend is going to take the kids out, the 3 of them, obviously, and you go back into the house and you could do a little bit of laundry, or there's loads of stuff, or you could watch television or do something, whatever yourself. I just prioritize sleep. I go back to bed for a nap. And actually by cutting the caffeine out, it's helped me being able to just have a rest, even if it's when Louis, I know he mightn't sleep for very long, but if I know he's going to have a half an hour, I'll just lie in the bed and try and get a bit of rest. Because it's the one thing that I have noticed that has been consistently a really kind of positive for helping me manage inflammation is a good sleep. But it's not easy, but it's more so if someone's going to help you out or you have somebody there, there's a million and one things you could do, but a nap is probably the most beneficial I think you could have. So even again,
put that to the top
put that
of the list.
To the top, put the laundry at the bottom and put the sleep at the top. Yeah.
Good advice. There's lots of new mothers get enormous support and benefit from, things like practical supports that might be, occupational therapy, for instance. Was there anything there that you found useful?
Again, kind of trial and error, trying things out over the years. I have my worst affected joints would probably be my knees. And I wear like a knee support when they're big. I don't wear it all the time because I do think they weaken the knees, but I do wear knee supports. I have a glove that helps with my this joint here and my thumb. And during later pregnancy, when I was very big on this pregnancy, I wore a Sorolla belt. It's just goes under the bump, and it really supports your kind of sacroiliac. And I wore that for a good few weeks, just around, because obviously everything's moving around a lot, and it's pretty loose after pregnancy as well. So I also have one of them. I don't know what they're called. They're kind of like a clipper thing, so you go around. So basically, if anyone has kids, they know that everything's on the ground.
A grabber.
Yeah, a grabber.
Yes.
And everything's on the ground.
Yes.
The toys are on the ground, and you spend your life bending down. And that's probably one of the toughest things, especially when my lower back is at me, is
bending all the time. Yeah.
So I have my grabber, but the kids it's probably in a toy box somewhere now.
They probably like
they
it as
love
well.
It, yeah. Try and grab the baby with it.
So I have one last question for you.
Yeah.
So if you were to give advice to someone with arthritis who's planning a family, what would that advice be?
I think, oh God, I suppose, as I said before, for me, my arthritis was definitely in a much better place before I had kids. And now it's definitely a little bit more unpredictable. It's not fully controlled. But, I think women of all walks of life have some difficulty with pregnancy, whether it's, conceiving or difficult pregnancies or stuff like that. And I just see it's not a reason, arthritis, to deter you from having kids or to worry too much about how you're going to manage with them and stuff like that. There is supports out there. There's great medical advice. There's really good medication. And I think if you have family support, I really think that it's very possible, and not to feel like too intimidated about it. But I do think you have to have that constant communication with your consultant, with your medical team, and also you have to take responsibility for it yourself and do as much as you can to make yourself healthy and make yourself strong so that you can kind of weather the storm, whether it's during pregnancy or postpartum, But I don't think we should let, arthritis be a deterrent to having a family.
Yeah, and it sounds like you had that conversation with your healthcare team in advance as well, in advance of when you were thinking.
Totally, exactly, and that's the thing. I was very lucky. I was for my first two pregnancies. I was on a biologic and I got pregnant very easy. But my third pregnancy, I was on methotrexate as well, and I had to be a lot more kind of conscious around the conception part and really think about that and come off the medication and stay on what was safe. And you really need your medical team and medical opinions and to be able to make those decisions with confidence. You know what I mean? So I think keeping those lines of communication open and starting them early, I think. And again, having help lined up. You might need it straight away. You'll need it straight away because the baby probably is going to not sleep. But, not to be afraid to ask for help and not to be like, oh, I'm a failure as a mother because my back is sore and I can't pick my baby up. You will be able to pick your baby up. It's just a flare and you'll get over it. All going well. So, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. I mean, I think people watching will have got a huge amount of inspiration, information, advice from learning about your story.
Yeah.
And we wish you all the very best.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, and thank you for joining us.
Cheers. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for watching this broadcast on pregnancy and arthritis. For more information, please log on to arthritisireland.ie. We also have groups on parenting and pregnancy where you can get support. Those groups are available via Facebook. And of course, you can contact our helpline on 0818 252 846. Thank you again.